There you are.
Sorry about that. Let me change my background so people won't see all the holes in my walls right now. Yeah, so and I see Victor is on. How you doing, Victor? Oh, I don't think he can hear.
This is going to be the same presentation from June, right?
Yep. So just BEPS Honeydew presentation.
All right. Working on it. Ready to go. So you're going to start off with the overview. Do you want me to do the introduction and then you do the benchmarking overview?
Sure. I can do the benchmarking overview because they're going to be cutting me off probably during BEPS. So I'd rather speak during then. And then once they arrive, I'm just going to show them where to put the couch. And then they're going to handle everything.
So when do you want me to take over?
So for now, let's aim for the audit, but most likely it'll be somewhere in between, like in the BEPS portion.
Okay.
Cool.
I mean, all this is familiar territory at this point.
Yep. Just repeating ourselves over and over and over in all these board meetings.
Yeah, it's like we're just repeating ourselves over and over and over in all these board meetings. Yeah, I was just
probably thinks we're a bunch of kooks.
I was just I'm lucky I got down here as fast as I did. It's about 20 miles away and we were burning brush. We cut down some trees and we're burning brush and I had like flaming embers like
all over you,
torching my flesh. Yeah.
Just a bunch of ash.
Yep. Bunch of hicks up here.
Great. So, and you have the presentation ready?
Yes.
Okay.
I only have my one small screen, so I think I can navigate between.
Yeah, I think you'll be fine.
Other people have overcome higher challenges.
Yeah, like going to space for only 5 minutes.
Mm-hmm. Did they do that today? Did Bezos do that today?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was actually pretty bummed that they didn't have cameras all over the shuttle so you can see inside and outside when they were up in space, but I guess Richard Branson is better at promoting his services.
Well, he got there first, and then when they had the press release, Amazon was like, "Well, actually, ours is going to go much higher, though." So these guys are insignificant compared to us.
I don't know. I really like the look of Virgin Galactic. It's a pretty cool looking plane, and how they just launch it from midair.
Yep.
It's a unique way of doing things. Weird that no one else has showed up. I just want to make sure that we all have the same.
Oh,
there's Jack. Okay, great. Hey, Jack.
Hello.
Hey, Jack.
How's it going?
Good.
Good.
How are you?
How about you?
Doing all right. Hey, Victor.
Nice.
I'm admiring your horse calendar behind you. Are you an equestrian?
Oh, I think it's just random.
Oh, it's all
farm animals.
Random animals. Let's see what else we got here. Oh, animal lovers calendar.
Nice.
I think it was I just asked somebody if anybody in the office had an extra calendar. And I just like turning around and be able to see the date. Didn't even realize that there was a horse this month.
Some people really go all out with their Zoom backgrounds. They like specifically decorate their walls to look like a halo behind them. My parents have that. It's kind of funny.
It's yeah, that's not really a priority to me. It's solar powered. AZ, I still owe you some answers for the utility notes, which I'll get back to you later today or tomorrow.
Okay.
I'm just gonna make sure I don't step on this tack.
Hey, Dustin, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Great.
Great. I lost this tack.
I look
I
very
show off my-
sunburnt in this.
Yeah. Are you?
No,
Oh.
it's just weird lighting. I've got the light coming from behind me right now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Jack, I don't think Josh is joining, right? He wasn't able to make any of those times that you suggested.
I don't think he's joining.
All right. Well, that's why we're recording this.
Yeah, and there's all the other property managers should be joining. There's 2 or 3 who are either on vacation or who are out sick. Everybody else should be joining.
All right. That works.
We got Aisha, Dustin, and Victor.
A view of the lake from here. I'm up in upstate. New York.
Nice.
Very cool. Very cool. Now that little tack that I had in there has disappeared. Probably into a book or something.
There he is. How's it going, Victor?
Hey. This computer is acting stupid.
Don't worry. We're all going through the same issues.
It's saying the link is, The
Are you
link is
still
asking
dealing-
for a passcode? Weird.
Let me see if I can get that.
Because it didn't require a passcode for me. It's possible
Yeah.
that, is it possible that when that happens, it has to be coming from a specific email address that received the link?
No, it's anybody who has the link, but I sent you the passcode in the chat. What's up,
Okay.
Keith?
Hey, how you doing?
Good, how about you?
I'm doing okay.
It's really weird that that tack just fell and disappeared. Okay, that worked for Michelle. Let's see, who else are we waiting on?
Is Nick Casey able to make it?
No, Nick is out of town. Sean, we're waiting on Sean. Dustin is on. Lauren is on vacation. Victor's on. Omar is out sick. Michelle's on. Aisha's on. So I think we're just waiting on Sean.
Cool.
Let me send her a text.
Wait a few more minutes. And just so everybody knows, I may have to jump off for a few minutes, but that's when AZ is gonna pretty much take over. And then I'll be right back. I have a couch being delivered. It only took 6 months to arrive.
You just been sitting Indian style on the floor since then?
Yeah, the house is pretty empty. It's crazy how long everything takes to arrive.
well, why don't we get started and we can fill Sean in.
Yeah, that works. And I mean, the beginning is just like really an introduction and a little bit about benchmarking. So even if he jumps in a little later, I don't think he's gonna miss too much. Great. And you want to pause. Oh, there you go. Oh,
There you go.
yeah, great. All right, so we'll just get started now. So nice to see everybody's faces. Well, some of you guys, Aisha, I think we may have met before when I presented to the group, maybe not, but we're gonna introduce ourselves anyways. So I'm Julian Belilti. We have my partner Andrew's online as well, who's gonna be presenting. And please disregard the date. We are not June 23rd. This is the same presentation that we gave to webinar. We present
You just
a
froze for a second
webinar,
there.
every 3 months or so. Okay, am I back?
Yeah.
We try to schedule a BEPS presentation every 3 months in order to provide updates based on the guidelines that have been updated by the DOE. We most likely will have another one in September. I'm actually going to turn off my video so that I don't pause as much. There we go.
And just so you know, Sean is on. So thank you, Sean. So we have everybody here.
Perfect. Great.
Okay.
Well, thanks for joining, Sean. Thanks for joining everybody else. But yeah, so today we're going to be discussing a few things. You can go to the next slide. First, we're going to go over what benchmarking is, the requirements that started in 2014, and then we're going to go into the BEPS overview, Building Energy Performance Standards, the reason why you guys are all here. We'll discuss the different pathways that you guys can choose from to compliance, the penalties for non-compliance, which actually have been recently updated, different ways for you to improve your Energy Star score, to improve your efficiency and really to comply. And then we're going to discuss a little bit about the solar impact to Energy Star scores, because a lot of your buildings do have the potential to go solar. It's one of the lowest hanging fruits in DC, since there's a lot of financing options for that. And if anybody has any questions anytime throughout the presentation, feel free to cut us off, or if you'd prefer to leave a chat, just write your question in the chat section and we can get to it at the end. So energy benchmarking, I'm sure you all are aware of what this entails. Everybody is required to use a program provided by the EPA called Energy Star Portfolio Manager. In there, we put down all of your building characteristics, from the size of the building. If you have a garage, we got to separate that, retail spaces, the number of units, number of bedrooms. And then we also put the utility data, energy, gas, electric, gas, and water, into the program from the last year, right? So for example, when we were benchmarking this year in 2021, we used 2020 data to get your 2021 score. With all of this, the program Energy Star Portfolio Manager calculates an Energy Star score. The score is anywhere between 1 and 100, 1 being the least efficient, 100 being the most efficient. They're essentially comparing your building to other buildings of the same size throughout the country and of the same building type. So for you guys, it's other multifamily buildings around whatever building size you have. Now, something else it calculates is the energy usage intensity. This is short for EUI, and it pretty much just calculates your electric and gas usage, converts it to kBTU, right? And then divides it by the square footage of your building. So it gets an energy usage per square foot. And that you can also use to see how efficient your building is. For your scores, you don't have to go to the site that's on the bottom here because we've already provided your 2019 and 2020 scores. So definitely keep those handy so that whenever the board ever asks for it, or if you need to compare it to the DC median score, you have that in hand. You can go to the next slide. So now for the requirements for benchmarking and the deadlines, this started back in 2014 for all buildings above 50,000 square feet. The deadline has always been April 1st to submit the previous year's data. For buildings above 25,000 square feet and below 50,000 square feet, they're going to be required next year to benchmark using 2021 data. And that's going to be ongoing every single year on April 1st. And then you have buildings above 10,000 square feet that'll be required starting in April 1st, 2025. So we still have a few more years for that. One thing to keep in mind for all buildings is, well, at least above 25,000 square feet, in 2024 and every 3 years after that, you're going to be required to hire a certified engineer. It has to be a different company from who's benchmarking your building. So it can't be Honeydew if we're still continuing to benchmark your buildings. It has to be a certified engineer who's unbiased, who's essentially verifying all of the data in Energy Star Portfolio Manager for your account, and making sure that it's accurate. It's important that your scores are as accurate as possible with what we're going to be talking about next, the BEPS program, Building Energy Performance Standards. AZ, I'm going to let you take care of this because I've delivered you guys outside, so I'm going to have to jump off real quick.
Okay. All right. Hi, everybody. I am AZ. So an overview of the BEPS program. This was started by the Clean Energy DC Omnibus Act of 2018, 3 years ago. That was a pretty sweeping piece of legislation. It did a lot of things, including increased SREC prices temporarily. And one of the other things it did was establish some minimum standards for energy efficiency in buildings, which is essentially what the BEPS program is. The BEPS program is all going to be based on what your 2019 Energy Star score is. But it's also, as we're doing benchmarking, it's also important to think about what your 2020 Energy Star score is, because that might be lower than it was before because you have a lot of people working from home. And it's really unclear at this point how many people will be going back into work and working full time. So we want to look at both of those scores, even though the BEPS program is primarily concerned with how much improvement you've made from the 2019 score. And every building that is subject to BEPS is going to be put on a 5-year compliance cycle. And you can tell if you're subject to BEPS if your score is below the median Energy Star score for the building type in DC. So for multifamily buildings, that median energy score is 66. So if you're at a 66, you don't really have to worry much about BEPS for 5 years until they re-up the scores. And then maybe at that point in time, your relative score has changed because everybody else has hopefully gone up. But if your Energy Star score is 65 or below, that means you will be having to take some actions or be subject to some penalties through the BEPS program. So as I mentioned, multifamily is at 66. And for those of you who are curious, that equates to an EUI, or an energy usage intensity, of 111 kBTUs per square foot. And then we've also included some other building types on this table to give you a frame of reference. You can see that hotels are somewhat close, offices are somewhat close to what a BEPS score is on the multifamily side. But then you can see warehouses in DC, for whatever reason, the average Energy Star score is very low in that category. So they may have an easier time complying than an office might. And it's also kind of interesting to look to see how, the Energy Star score is a relative score compared to, what the other building types of your peers are. But the EUI is an absolute score. So you can see that a hospital has to try to get an Energy Star score of 50 which is quite a bit lower than the 66 for the multifamily residential. But then you look at its EUI, and they have an EUI that's about 4 times higher than a residential building, which makes sense because they have a lot more equipment, a lot of lights, and a lot of higher usage intensity patterns. So BEPS is starting this year for all buildings 50,000 square feet and above. In 2027, BEPS is going to be required for buildings 25,000 square feet above, and then the final tranche will occur in 2033. That buildings that are 10,000 square feet and above will be subject to BEPS, and they need to make the determination of whether they're above or below that median score. So even though the BEPS, yep, go ahead.
Is a quick question. So we've been required to do benchmarking for 50,000 square foot plus buildings for the past 5 years or so.
Mhm.
And they've essentially just been a test run really the last 5 years, because since this is the first year that the BEPS program is required for those buildings 50,000 square feet and above. So am I understanding this correctly, that since next year, 25,000 to 49,999 square foot buildings are required to benchmark next year, but it's really more of a test run for the next 5 years, since the BEPS program won't start until 2027?
So it is a test run for BEPS, but it's going to be real. They're still going to have penalties if you don't comply with the benchmarking part. So the benchmarking will be,
Of course, benchmarking will still be required, but
Mhm.
if the score for, let's say you have a 30,000 square foot building and you get a score of 10 or 25 or something like that, anything below that 66, there's not going to be any repercussions until 2027. Obviously,
Yeah.
we can still use it as a, benchmark, as this is a building that should be improve its efficiency, but there's not going to be any requirements from the city or from the country, from the DOE. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. So in 2027 will be the year they tell you are subject to BEPS and you need to choose a compliance pathway. And then 5 years after that, you'll still have until basically 2032 to comply. But 2032 is going to be using 2031 data. So you've got to make sure that the effects of your change, the change to your infrastructure, are showing up in the year prior to the last year of the compliance cycle, basically. So there's a little bit of a pipeline there.
Yeah. I just want to make sure that we all, we're all understanding what's going to happen, but also understand that this is something that needs to be on our radar, but isn't something that we have to worry about right this second.
Yep, that's right. Yeah, we'll be focusing on just getting the benchmarking data correct next year. So we mentioned there's compliance pathways. So this is kind of a choose your own adventure. Let's say DOEE says you are subject to BEPS. You need to do one of 4 things in order to avoid penalties. The first pathway is the performance pathway. And the performance pathway requires you to reduce your energy usage intensity by 20% or more. And in general, this pathway is good if you aren't even close to the BEPS standard, right? If you're 10, if you're 20, if you're 30, and you'd have to really, really reduce your energy usage intensity by like 30 or 40% to raise your Energy Star score to 66. Then the performance pathway is better, because you just have to look at whatever EUI is and try to reduce that by 20%. If you are closer to the target, like maybe you're a 60 or maybe you're a 55, then the standard target pathway is probably going to be the easier way to comply. And what we can do is we can, after the energy audit, and we'll get into this a little bit later, we can figure out what type of impact each of the energy conservation measures is going to have on your score. And we can give you advice about whether we think the standard target pathway is a better route for you versus a performance pathway, if you're kind of right in the middle between, being closer to 66, but maybe not being as low as like 5 or 10. And then if you're in need of more certainty, there's the prescriptive pathway, and this still is in development by DOEE. And this is going to be a point-based system. So they're going to go through and give you a list of energy conservation measures and say, if you do this, we'll give you 5 points. If you do this, we'll give you 8 points. If you do this, we'll give you 5 points. and then add it all up. And if all of those things add up to 25 points and you're working hand in hand with DOEE, you're going to be able to comply that way without, running the risk of making a bunch of improvements that don't affect your score as much as we had anticipated. The downside of the prescriptive pathway is there's more paperwork and there's more bureaucracy and reporting, working with the DOEE to make sure you're doing everything in line with how they lay out their prescriptions. And then finally,
And
there's
just to add real quick, and just to be in a little bit more detailed on the actual process. So there's steps that you need to take first, like what AZ mentioned. Start with the energy audit. You have to share that with the DOEE. Then you have to come into an agreement with the DOEE on which energy conservation measures you have to implement that will reach, we believe right now it's a 25% reduction in your energy usage. Then once you choose those energy conservation measures and value them based on points to reach a total of 25 points, it's at that point where you have to show which contractors you'll be working with, the dates that you're going to be implementing these projects. And after that, you have to verify the savings from the project. So it's kind of like proving that you've actually moved forward with the projects. So there are a lot of steps required in the prescriptive pathway. It is an option, but usually we recommend the first two. And sorry, AZ, for cutting you.
good. And then finally, the alternative compliance pathway. This one is still really in development. There's not a lot of details, but this is generally going to be either for folks who want to go above and beyond, or for affordable housing buildings that might not have the budget. It might just put an undue burden on them to truly be able to comply with this law, and they might not be able to pay the penalty afterwards. So they kind of have put this in here just as an alternative pathway for folks who this might be needlessly burdensome for, but this will probably not be relevant for any of your properties. And then, yep, go ahead.
So for the performance pathway, I want to make sure that I'm clear on that. So in an example where somebody may have scored a 10 on their Energy Star score, they're actually scoring a 12 is not going to be sufficient, even though that's a 20% increase, because you're looking at specifically at the EUI, not at the energy score.
Yeah. So maybe they have an EUI score of 100 and they would have to get it down to an 80 to comply with that. Now, I don't know how the numbers work out, but moving from a 10 to a 12 is actually a pretty big bump for an Energy Star score. So maybe you can move from like a 10 to a 15, and that could be a 20% reduction in your EUI. Just not exactly sure how those numbers shake out at the top of my head. I think when we looked, it was about 2 EUI was equal to 1 Energy Star score, but it could change based upon the building type.
And so you sent us, or Julian sent us the 2019 and 2020 scores for each of all the buildings that are represented on this call. But those were just the Energy Star scores. Do you have easy access to each of the buildings' EUIs? Yeah,
that's all in Portfolio Manager.
Okay, so is that included in the Excel confirmation emails that were sent for each of the buildings?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep, it's in the compliance report. And just so everybody knows, let's say that you are a 10, right? And if you hit a Energy Star score of 15, or reduce your site EUI by 20%, but it only brings it up to a 15, then that means the following cycle, which is 5 years down the road when the next cycle begins, you will also be required to comply again, right? All the way until you reach that DC median score of 66. So there's, that could also be something that you want to look into is, do I always want to continuously try to comply every 5 years? Or do I just want to move forward with some large improvements, an HVAC upgrade or something like that now, so that we can just take this off our plate and not have to worry about it again in the future? And that's not your decision. Ultimately, it's the board's decision. But that's something that we're going to communicate with the boards or the associations after they do an energy audit, if that's the step that they decide to take.
Cool. And then we have one update. So prior to a couple weeks or months ago, DOE would give you a year from when the program started for your size building to determine which path you want to take. And because of COVID-19, they've just extended that by 1 year. So you don't actually have to choose your pathway and report your pathway to DOE until April 1st, 2023. That being said, time is not on our side here in terms of getting ready and potentially making some major improvements to the building. So it's still good to start earlier, even though you've got a little bit more breathing room in when you choose the pathway. So if you don't meet your goal, you will be subject to a penalty. And the penalty is based upon how big your building is. And in general, the formula is it's going to be $10 per square foot, rounded down to the nearest $100,000. So I have some examples here. If your building is 742,000 square feet, the maximum penalty, basically, if you do nothing to comply with this law, you can get penalized $7.4 million. Likewise, $229,000, the maximum penalty is $2.2 million. On the smaller side, 32,000 square feet, $300,000 fine, 11,000 square feet, $100,000 fine. But very importantly is you get partial credit, and it's proportionate credit actually. So if you are on the performance pathway and your goal is to reduce your energy usage by 20%, but you only reduce it by 10%, you'll take whatever the maximum of penalty fine is, and you're going to divide it by 2. So it's always worth doing something, even if you can't do everything, because it's still going to save you a lot of money in the long run. And there's also a way that if you're already pretty close to the score, to the benchmark score of 66, then there's actually going to be a way to pre-adjust the fines downward. And this is a little bit more complicated of a formula, so I'm not going to get too deep into the weeds here. But just be aware that if you're 64, then your 229,000 square foot, your penalty is going to be, your maximum penalty is going to be closer to $1 million at that point, because you're going to be already so close that they're not going to put a lot of pressure on you with a hefty penalty to do something about it.
Which is still a pretty penny.
Yeah, and we have 5 years for this compliance. So, as a company, we will be doing everything that we can. The only scenario in which we'll even be close to being subject to one of these large penalties is if the board is completely resistant to our recommendations. And if that's the case, that's a whole separate discussion that we'll need to have with the board.
Mm-hmm. So these are just some. Yeah, go ahead.
So I was just going to add that. Actually, continue. I just completely lost my train of thought.
Okay. So these are just some examples. We just talked about the performance pathway example, but let's say you have a standard target and your gap between what you have now and 66 is 25%, or excuse me, your gap is, whatever it is, but you can only narrow that gap by 25%. So that's going to give you a 25% discount whenever your maximum penalty is. On the prescriptive pathway, if you're only able to implement 12 of the 25 needed pathway points, then your penalty is going to be 48%. That would be if you had done nothing. And then for the alternative compliance pathway, it's still really unsure, how partial credit is going to work for that pathway.
And I actually just remember what I was going to mention. So, Jack, you were talking about how you guys have 5 years to do all of this. So technically, as you remember, your score, let's say in 2026, right, when this ends, your score in 2026 is going to represent 2025 data, right? In order to see the energy improvements in 2025, you have to implement everything and they have to be installed and running, right? Whatever equipment that you're installing or solar system or whatever by 2023. So you could see the savings in 2024, so that you can see the savings in 2025. And your score will match the compliance score by 2026. Does that make sense? So you really only have until 2024 to implement everything so that they can see the updated score, hopefully that's in compliance by 2026.
Okay, so instead of 5 years, it's really 3.5 years, considering that the end of 2024 is about 3.5 years from now. That's fine. That's still plenty of time to get our, to get a move on.
Mhm.
Like-
All right, so we've talked about how to report the data. We've talked about the program. We've talked about the penalties. Now let's talk about what you can actually do to improve your score. And the first step to determining what pathway you should take and what energy conservation measures you should make is getting an energy audit done. An ASHRAE level 2 audit is required for the prescriptive pathway. It's not required for the other pathways, but it is recommended because it's of the 3-level audits, it really gives us the most amount of actionable information at the lowest price. So the first component of this is just documenting the building conditions, what the different mechanical systems are, what how old the HVAC system is, what the building is being used for, how old the building is, that kind of thing. It's then going to look at everything in the building that consumes energy and create a pie chart breaking out how the energy is being consumed and showing you what the big drivers of your energy bills are. And then after that, we'll make recommendations on ECMs or energy conservation measures. It'll give you a list of different ways to improve your score, and it'll tell you how that's going to impact your EUI and your Energy Star score is. And then it's going to give you some financial analysis too. So not only are you making the compliance case, but you're making the business case for why these improvements are going to be a good investment for your communities. And it can also create, if you want to go one step further, it can create a computer model where it can model all of the systems in your building and be able to predict how those systems will interact with each other to either create positive or destructive interference and give you a much more granular understanding and estimation of how these ECMs are going to impact your score. Some low-hanging fruit ECMs that we recommend everybody look into. We've been working with you guys quite a bit on solar power purchase agreements. These are great because there's no cost for the community and it will save them quite a bit in their operating budget moving forward. So it has the double effect of both augmenting their budget to pay for other ECMs, but then also will improve their score, but only if they're on the standard target pathway. And this is kind of a weird nuance within the law, because on the standard target pathway, you're looking at the Energy Star score. And the Energy Star score factors in whether you're using renewable energy. But the energy usage intensity score doesn't care what the source of the energy is. It only cares how much you're using. So if you put in solar, you're still going to be using the same amount of energy, even though you're pulling less from the grid. So even though it's going to help on your operating budget, it's not going to help reduce your EUI score. Other things that would help your EUI score, LED lighting. We have shared savings options. So similar to a solar power purchase agreement, these are no cost options that can upgrade your lighting. And LEDs use about 10% the amount of energy as incandescence and 50% that of fluorescence. So that can make quite a big difference, especially if you have garage and external lighting. You can also look at non-operational load management. This is things like keeping hallways illuminated and cooled during the nighttime when nobody's using them. There's a lot of ways that you can restrict usage without impacting the comfort, the quality of life of your residents, and that's one example of them. The next is to optimize startup and power down of equipment sequencing. This is more applicable to the industrial side, but there is some room on the HVAC side for you to look at this type of things. Installing variable speed drives on some of these engines, so you're not going from 0 to 60 in 2 seconds. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later. And then you can also do some softer things like implement incentives for cultures of conservations, increasing mindfulness of how much people are using energy within their units, whether they're using energy efficient appliances. We've seen some boards sponsor or incentivize unit owners to make improvements within their unit, because now that we have BEPS, it's the actions of your neighbors are going to have more of an impact if they don't do anything. And then chilled water reset on your cooling tower. That's something that should be done at least 4 times a year. And it's something that you just have to train a maintenance person to do. It doesn't actually cost anything, but it can increase the hot water heating efficiency by quite a bit. Mid to high level improvements. So I mentioned variable speed drives. On older motor systems and drive systems, it's basically either on or off. It's running at 0% and 100%. And the analogy that I like to make for this is, imagine if you're driving a car and you're either going 100 miles per hour or you're braking as fast as you can. Like, that is not going to be a very fuel efficient way to drive. When we drive cars, we slowly accelerate and we slowly decelerate. Because that's more fuel efficient. It's also, of course, a better experience for the passengers in your car. That's going to be the same in HVAC equipments and anything else that uses a motor, is that instead of turning on for 10 minutes and then turning off for 10 minutes, why don't you just leave it on for 50% at 50% speed for 20 minutes, right? So that's going to be a much more efficient usage of energy than turning everything on and turning everything off over and over and over. A VRF system, variable refrigerant flow, sometimes they're called VRV systems. These are heating and cooling systems that are less reliant on compressors, which are a very energy usage intensity intense aspect of an HVAC system. These use the technology, they're not using ducts and hot air. They're using a cooling substance that's much smaller pipes than compared to ductwork. And this is a really good system. If after the energy audit comes back and they say, we've found that you're doing a lot of simultaneous heating and cooling. And simultaneous heating and cooling can be the result of heat runoff on equipment during the summer that you're just not capturing. Or it can be the result of one unit preferring it cooler than another unit. And maybe if a unit has no control over their heat, and they've got their windows open and they've got a fan and a window air conditioner unit running at the same time, this is extremely inefficient, right? Because you have cross forces running against each other. VRF technology is able to resolve this by allowing you to cool some spaces, heat some spaces, and keep every room that has a terminal at a different temperature in a highly efficient manner. You can look at improving hot water fixtures. So this is primarily going to be sink and shower heads. So for BEPS doesn't care about your cold water. It doesn't care about your toilet water. It's not measuring the amount of gallons that the building is using, but it is measuring all the energy that goes into heating the hot water that's being used in showers and sinks. Boiler upgrades, we've been in some buildings recently that have boilers that are 30 to 40 years old and in need of replacement anyway. And this could be a good opportunity to get what you need to change anyway, and really take a harder look at putting in some more efficient appliances as you go through that process. Same thing with a chiller. And then the combined heat and power system. These systems are really neat. If you've got natural gas in your building, and maybe you have an older boiler that's giving off a lot of extra heat. And again, this is a big deal in the summer when you're trying to keep your building cool. What the CHP system will do is it will capture all that heat. It will retain that heat. So you first eliminate the heating and cooling issue, but then take all that heat and you convert it into electricity. So that will also save you money on your electric bill. And then
for that one, we think that buildings, or we think the contractors that we work with prefer to see buildings that have, I believe, over 100 units in order for it to be a feasible project. One building that comes to mind is the Cairo with Dustin. There could be a few other buildings, and That's why we're here. Typically, the energy audit does not include that in their reports, but this is something that we're having them include along with solar and a few other things as well to add value.
The next item is Energy Management Information Systems, EMIS. So this is basically going to give you a dashboard to give you real-time data and tracking how much your improvements have made a difference. It's also going to allow people to have smart thermostats and make it a lot easier to program thermostats so people aren't leaving their AC, cracked up to 100 when they go out of town for a weekend. That type of thing is going to be really important for moving this forward. And then there's some, building envelope things, window sealing, replacing windows. That can be pretty expensive, but if it needs to happen anyway, window efficiency has improved quite a bit over the past few years. And then retro commissioning existing equipment. Commissioning is just making sure that the equipment is well suited for the task that it's been assigned. And often if that equipment has been running for years, without a lot of monitoring, things could get out of whack, and you could have some deferred maintenance issues that need to be dealt with to make sure it's operating 100%.
So
these are-
one,
Mhm.
sorry, quick jump in. So one thing that I'm got from all that is anytime, particularly at our larger buildings, which are all applicable here, anytime we have a large project coming up, roof replacement, window replacement, boiler, anything like that, it's probably a good idea for us to be checking in with you guys to see if the options or the proposals that we're getting include systems that are efficient. Anytime, regardless of the BEPS program and compliance with the city, anytime we're doing a major capital expenditure that is replacing something that was built 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, chances are that if we're installing something that was manufactured in 2021, it's probably going to be more energy efficient. And if not, it's probably something that we should be looking into. So this is something that we should all be, that we should all have on our radar to try to be more efficient when we're doing large projects, and obviously with small projects too, but it's going to make a bigger difference for some of these more major projects.
Yeah, that's a good point. Whenever you guys have questions about that, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. They do provide in most HVAC equipment what's called a SEER rating, which is a seasonal energy efficiency rating. So a SEER score is going to be one way that you can look at, maybe your existing infrastructure has a SEER score of 12, and you could be considering putting in a SEER of 20 or a SEER of 22. And, we can help you analyze those types of decisions. So this is a list of some of those energy conservation measures. And it's important to point out that this is taken from a single report, and this is going to be different. It's going to be a different cost. It's going to be a different payback, and it's going to have a different impact on EUI depending on what application you're putting it in. So all of these are going to be tailored. We just wanted to give you guys a rough idea of the cost of some of these systems and what the payback would look like on those. So unoccupied cooling setback, this is another example of a no cost, low cost. Only costs about $1,200 to do this. The payback is almost immediate. And you can see that it reduces an EUI by 1.8, which is pretty significant if you're looking at average EUI score of around 111. Same thing with chilled water reset, something that's very easy to be done, but it's often neglected to do. And the cost is low, the payback is fast. On the other hand, you get in these bigger things like a hydronic heating system. This is a boiler that instead of steam, it uses hot water, which is more efficient, because with a steam system, you're losing a lot of heat through vents and whatnot. There's a lot more heat loss in those systems. So the payback here is also quite low relative to some things. It's only 4.4 years. The EUI reduction was very significant, 23. In some cases that could be all you need to reach compliance. And then we look at something, this is the variable refrigerant flow HVAC system. This is the system to deal with that simultaneous heating and cooling. The example that we looked at, this is a $4.2 million investment. It's not going to pay for itself in 25 years. So this is probably one of those things that you don't want to invest in unless your existing HVAC system is due to be replaced anyway. But it does have a huge huge EUI benefit. You can see that that was an estimated reduction of 74 kBTUs per square foot.
And just to add to this, before we get into the solar impact, AZ, would you mind sharing what an energy audit report looks like? You can Alfred, Spectrum, Clydesdale. There we go. And this is just to show you what it looks like. So scroll up to the top, or at least one of the main pages up top. Now you can scroll down. This is a report that one of our energy auditing companies has put together for another condominium. I'll share this with whoever is looking to do an energy audit for their specific building. But as you can see past the executive summary, they immediately start with the list of energy conservation measures that they could implement at that building. This is a medium-sized building, I think around like 65,000 square feet. So you do have similar buildings to this. They are actually looking into adding solar and also possibly a VRV system. As you can see on the bottom table on the right, they also include the impact to your Energy Star score. This building specifically wanted to look at the impact to the Energy Star score and not EY because they knew that they could meet the 66. That's really their goal. And you don't want 66 to be your goal. You're really shooting for like a 70 because you never know how the energy usage is going to change in the building. I mean, we didn't know a pandemic was going to hit and that everybody was going to work from home and that energy usage was going to spike in these buildings. So that's definitely something that can help you guys, at least before even coming up with an action plan, starting with the energy audit, so that they can start listing all the potential improvements in your building. And this isn't just good for BEPS, this is good in general. You guys get reserve studies. This is pretty much a reserve study focused on the energy usage in the building. So you can keep these reports for a long period of time. And whenever you're interested to find other ways to save energy or save in operational costs in the building, right? Improve your budgets, always come back to the report and start checking off the list pretty much until your building is fully efficient. And there's obviously several other pages to this, but we're not going to be going into that right now.
And Julian, I actually had a question for you. For the 25,000 square foot buildings and above, they are going to, the year that they start to become applied to BEPS is 2027. Are they looking at 2019 as their benchmarking score? Or are they looking at 2025 as their score in order to benchmark their improvement from?
So you said it's 2027 that it begins, so it would be 2025, and
Okay.
DC will get an average median score of 2024 and 2025. So the 66 for multifamily buildings was an average score between 2018 and 2019.
So that kind of creates a little bit of a perverse incentive, because if you're a 26,000 square foot building, you wouldn't want to make any major improvements to efficiency in 2022, because that's going to make it potentially harder to comply, harder to reduce things by 20%. Unless it bumps you right up to 66 and then you don't have to
exactly
altogether.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, if I were them, I would wait unless it's something that's directly connected to incentives that are scheduled to decline. So for example, SREX with solar, if you wait to go solar until 2024, 2025, the incentives are going to be significantly lower than they are today, right? So for those type of projects, especially that they don't require an investment or anything, those we definitely recommend moving forward with. They're not going to affect your EUI, So that's good there. They are going to increase your score, but that doesn't mean that you have a lower chance of complying with your Energy Star score. So solar is probably one thing that I would definitely not wait for. If you're looking to replace a boiler or something like that, maybe for
Yeah.
sure.
Do you want to look at
All
any,
depends.
any other pages in this report?
Nope, we're good to go back to the presentation. Thanks, AZ.
Mhm.
So the next thing we're going to discuss, and AZ kind of touched upon this, solar really only affects your Energy Star score, not your site EUI, right? And here are a few examples of buildings we're working with. There's one building that they were able to install a 126 kilowatt system. It's a master metered building. Their original score in 2019 was a 48. The simulated score, if they did go solar, was a 64. That shoots them up fairly high and just a few points below the compliance score. But then if you go to the next two columns, their EUI site EUI score in 2019 was a 55.7. It did not change, right? And that's the same across the board. Just real quick, there's a difference between site EUI and source EUI. Site EUI is based on the energy that you use on site, regardless of the source. Source EUI does take into account the source. So if you did go solar, that affects your source EUI, but for some reason, DOEE only wanted to focus on your site EUI for the performance pathway. This doesn't mean that if you have the ability to go solar, but you are focusing on reducing your site EUI by 20%, that you don't go solar. There are ways for you to actually make money, cash up front, by leasing your roof space for a solar array, right? And you can even benefit from the energy savings, but you would want, especially as an association with limited budget, to receive that cash up front from the solar companies to invest in other energy conservation measures that will actually improve your site EUI. So we think that regardless of what pathway you choose, solar is a great way to move forward. Just understand which pathway you're choosing so that you can structure the solar deal. And that's what we're here for, so that you can get as much money upfront as possible if you're choosing the performance pathway, or you can just get the most savings from if you end up choosing the standard target pathway.
So
Now,
I think there's something interesting on this table, and maybe I'll put a little pop quiz up to the audience and see how your energy detective skills are. So if you look at these last two items, you have a 124 kilowatt array and you have a 72 kilowatt array. Both of those would offset their energy usage, their electric usage, by 10%, right? Yeah, in the 124 kilowatt example, their Energy Star score only goes up by 4 points, versus in the 72 kilowatt, it goes up 9 points. So who has any ideas of how that same 10% reduction in electricity can impact one Energy Star score more so than another one? Did I stump you? Sounded like I stumped you. So the
Yeah.
answer, at least I got you thinking. So the answer that we came up with is what's not depicted on this table, which is their natural gas usage, which is the other component that goes into their Energy Star score. So if the 124 kilowatt, even though it's a 10%, only bumps it up 4, that tells me that that building uses more natural gas, and thus
Building probably has a boiler.
electricity. Yeah. And so the electricity is a smaller percentage of their total energy usage. So that means it has a less impact on its score because it's more reliant on natural gas in the 72 kilowatt example. So there you go.
love it.
So in other words, some of these buildings that have less or no gas usage, some of these to actions that we can take are probably going to have more effect on those, because right now it's based on technology available, it's easier to make changes to electric powered systems than gas powered systems.
That's exactly right. Yeah, and obviously with solar, the only thing that we're looking at is electric.
Great. Well, I'll finish this off, AZ. So, as we mentioned throughout the presentation, we offer BEPS consulting. And I'll just get this out of the way first. So we don't charge your associations for our consulting work. We are simply guiding them down the right path in order to comply. We will provide first a few different companies for the energy audit for you to choose if you decide to go down that route. And then we will provide different contractors for the different services that are proposed in the energy audit based on however the association wants to move forward. We get paid a commission from any contractors that you end up choosing. This is a sales commission that's normally paid to their internal sales staff. But since they don't have a salesperson on this and we're basically handling it for them, they're paying us instead. And then most of the time, we'll also provide multiple contractors to bid on this so that we make sure that you're getting the best product at the best price. How we start this out is, I mean, really the first option here, or the first service here, doesn't apply to you guys because we benchmarked your buildings. But typically, if we haven't benchmarked the building, maybe a new building that you've added on recently, we'll review all of that data to make sure it's accurate, because you want to make sure that you start with an accurate score as your baseline. Then, based on what we see, if a solar array or LED lights is not going to get you above that hump to compliance, we recommend an energy audit. Again, we have a few different companies that we work with. We'll provide you a few different proposals, the reports, so example reports that have come out of it, so you can see the end product. There's really one company that stands out the most to us. We still provide you with other proposals, but they provide an a la carte menu of items for you to choose from, right? So let's say that you've already replaced your boiler and your windows. No need to look at the building envelope or the boiler, right? And these are boxes that you check off that will change the price of the audit. So also, if there's a specific budget or a price that the association can afford, then that's when we set up a meeting with the energy auditing company. So the energy auditing company can help decide which are the most important items to focus on based on what you've worked on already, based on the age of some of your equipment, so on and so forth. Once you've done the audit, then they'll provide you with a report, energy audit report. We're going to evaluate those results with you along with the energy auditing team. And then we're going to determine and then report the pathway that you've chosen, right? And that we've proposed essentially to DOEE. Best to do that as early as possible, just so you get that step off your plate, and that you can begin deciding timeline on when you're going to implement a project or two or three. Then we also provide, and this is something else the energy auditing company does, but we can do this on the side as well, is simulating your Energy Star and your EY score impact. And that's going to be based on whatever ECMs you choose. And when we collect, for example, multiple different solar proposals, they're all going to have different production numbers. So we'll be able to compare each impact to your Energy Star score based on the system size that they're proposing. And again, back to the simulation, we are using your 2019 and 2020 usage data when simulating the score, right? So the chances of you using the same exact energy as 2019 and 2020 are low. So we just want you to keep that in mind, that your energy usage in the future can change. So the score that we provide you is just an idea of how much it'll increase your score by that time. We don't know if we're moving towards a hybrid approach where less people are going to the office, but some are a few days a week. Everybody's going to still work from home. So we're going to see more of like the 2020 usage data. Or people are just living in different areas of the country and only living in DC for a certain amount of time. So just keep that in mind. And then from there, we're going to develop the 5-year action plan, which, like we mentioned before, is more like a 3.5-year action plan at this point, because you want to implement those projects so that you can see the energy savings and the Energy Star score impact by that last year. If you wait until the 4th or 5th year to implement these projects, you're not going to see the score change by the time that you actually have to comply. And that's where penalties could be put into action. And then you want to compare and coordinate with service providers and financiers. That's something that we can help provide. We have a large network of different contractors that we continue to build, and financiers as well that can potentially finance these projects. And actually, one of the energy auditing companies, the one I mentioned before, will provide all of the different rebates and incentives available for each of the energy conservation measures. And they'll help you apply for it, so on and so forth. And then at the end and throughout the process, we're going to be tracking your Energy Star score year after year and your EY, because we're most likely benchmarking your buildings as well. And we're going to make sure that you're on track to complying by the end of the compliance period. Any questions?
I have a few questions, but I'll wait in case anybody else has any questions.
All right.
Does anybody else have any questions about this?
Do we have an idea of when they're going to start doing the smaller buildings, the deadline? I thought they'd published it, but I forgot.
For benchmarking or for BEPS?
To start the benchmarking require. There you go. Yeah.
Next year.
So benchmarking is next year. So really, you would have to get started January 1st. And this is something that we're going to speak to Jack and Josh about in terms of us potentially handling the benchmarking services for the smaller buildings. But yeah, pretty much if we were to, then we'd reach out in January, February next year to get started on that. Same thing, we send you basically the questionnaire, you fill that out, and we finish everything by April 1st, as long as PEPCO doesn't take as much time as they did this year in returning all that data.
And Julian, we can talk separately about that, but there's only 12 or so buildings that we have that are 50,000 square feet, but there are a lot more buildings that we have that are 25,000 square feet, or between the 25 and 49. So I assume that there's some sort of, I don't know the exact square footage of all of our buildings. I assume there'll be some sort of list of qualifying lists.
There is a list already. I can send that to you so you can start making the list as well.
Okay.
And that's based off of the square footage that DOE has.
Mm-hmm.
I know it's difficult because a lot of condominiums don't have the square footage of their building. So we will just rely on that for now.
Yeah, and also it's a different discussion if it says it's 45,000 square feet versus 26,000 square feet, because if it says 26, it might be off by a small amount. But if it says 45,000, it's probably at least above 25.
And there have been some buildings that that aren't even on the list that I've had to benchmark this year. We just asked DOE if this was required. They asked us if we had the square footage. We calculated it ourselves, and it was indeed over 50,000 square feet. So I'm sure that's going to be the same next year, but they're not going to be as strict about that new tranche of buildings until like right before the BEPS program begins. Okay.
So I know that you have been in touch with a few, like, for example, you mentioned Cairo. I know you've been in touch with Dustin about Cairo. It looks like Cairo already made a big jump from 2019 to 2020. Have you what's your progress thus far in Cairo? Has there been any progress on any other buildings? And I think you've been in touch with Letterman. You've been in touch with Victor about Letterman. Is that right?
Yep. So I think, so we haven't made any progress yet. We were really waiting until this meeting. So after this, I think I can reach out to basically all the buildings that have the low scores below 66 and then begin that process. Now that the property managers have either joined this conversation and understood a little bit more about the BEPS program, or will be watching the recorded video, they have a little bit more language now to explain this in layman's terms to the boards, and then pretty much set up a meeting. That's the first thing we do, is set up a meeting so that we can present almost the same presentation that we had today to the boards, explain to them the details about the program, the importance about the program, let them know what their maximum penalty is, how far they fall from the score. And then by that time, I would have already had energy audit proposals, so presenting those as well and getting their thoughts on how they'd like to move forward.
Okay, and so yeah, that would be great. If anybody on here has not already started this process with Honeydew, please coordinate a walkthrough with Julian or AZ at a time when you can. I also want to clarify that none of this doesn't require you or any of the boards to use Honeydew. Let's say I don't know the personalities of all the boards. If there's a board member who maybe him or herself at one of the buildings is an energy consultant, or has a friend who's an energy consultant or something like that, as long as they are in compliance, or as long as they're creating a plan that complies with this, we are not required to use Honeydew. We don't have a exclusive contract or anything with them, but we do need to show the boards that we are taking some action on this. So I'm happy to discuss that with any of you afterwards, if necessary. And I'll also follow up, Julian and AZ. I'll follow up with Lauren and Nick, who are currently out right now, but they represent Garfield and Kalorama Place. So we'll make sure that they reach out to you next week when they're back.
And Kenyon Square, that one's going to be a difficult one with the retail spaces.
I know, I'm
Sean's
sending
on
you
here.
an email right now.
Oh, Sean. Oh,
Yeah.
okay, great.
Yeah, I'm
That's good
sending
to
you
know.
an email right now.
Okay, great. Yeah, that one you definitely want to get started on soon. Very low score.
Yeah.
And what we've seen from patterns is basically every building we've been working on that had retail stores below has screwed up the score, and it's dropped it down. You honestly have the highest score out of all the other buildings like that. But we'll figure out a solution.
At a 2?
And
Yeah.
yeah, they're all ones.
I was like, we went up.
Yeah, exactly.
You went up 100%, Sean.
Now, one thing we may have to do for like that building, and we've seen this happen before. There are buildings that are harder to measure the square footage than others. We usually do it through a program called Area Calculator, where we can measure a certain area from satellite images and get the square footage and then multiply by floors, all that type of stuff. Kenyon Square has a very unique layout, and especially when you go down to the garage, and I tried to figure out where that was based on the satellite image, and I do not want to guess. So we kept that square footage the same as what the OEE provided, because they just wouldn't have accepted my guesstimate. So that may require, and we're still trying to find a company out there who can measure square footages at a decent price. And that could increase your rate, your score. So that's something I can discuss with the board whenever we schedule a meeting, if we do. So we can present BEPS and all of that. And that could be just a recommendation that we can give them. 3 years from now, like we mentioned in here, every building's going to have to verify their data. 2020, was it 2023 or 2024? So by then you have to hire an engineer to actually verify everything. That will include, I believe, the square footage of the building as well. So you can wait until then and then get a pleasant surprise, and just right now aim at increasing your current score or EUI. So that's something we can discuss on the side. I don't want to take up too much
And Julian, I assume that's something that you guys will handle, that you guys will subcontract out
Yeah, and we're still,
Okay.
we're still.
starting
looking, I
in a
mean,
couple years.
Starting to, oh yeah, that for sure. But right now, I mean, like in terms of just measuring the square footage, we reached out to one architecture firm and they gave us, I think it was like 4K, which is way too high. But yeah, we'll figure that out for sure. First thing, again, most important thing is to inform the boards about this, schedule the meeting if you decide to go through us, unless they prefer to go with someone else for the BEPS consulting. And then that's when we inform them and decide what the next steps are at that point, step by step. We don't want to overwhelm you guys.
All right.
Great. Were there any other questions before Jack?
The slideshow that you guys presented, maybe I missed this already. Is that going to be something you guys are going to email to us as well? I was trying to take screenshots for whatever reason.
Oh yeah,
my Wi-Fi.
yeah. We'll send the PDF along with the recording.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think we're gonna edit the recording so we don't have like the first 15 minutes of not talking about anything.
Yeah, I have the same. You guys have already sent that to me, so I'll send that over also right now
All right, that works.
or momentarily.
Cool. So I'm guessing no other questions, Jack?
No, you've answered all my questions. Thank you for your time, and thanks everybody else for joining.
Hey,
Yeah,
welcome.
of course. Thanks,
Appreciate it,
everybody. So
guys.
we'll send the recording. Jack will send the presentation. And yeah, and actually